record our interview, I would now start just Audacity and record our interview, and you can do whatever you want with it afterwards. Um, I would just send
Yeah,
you the.
let me just do. So what exactly do you want to use this interview for? So what exactly? I remember something.
We won't publish it. We won't publish it. It's just for our inner research. We do something what we call empirical monitoring of the field of artificial consciousness. So at the end of the day, our parliamentarians, the politicians, want to have a report. Yeah, so we are
Which one? The
funded
federal of the
federal, the BMBF, Federal Ministry of Education and Science. It's always our biggest money giver, so to say, in our institute. And we are kind of a freak project in the big funded ITA projects. But it's very interesting that we were funded for ourselves, to be honest, because when we started, it seemed that it's kind of just scientific fiction, science fiction scenario. But when we dig deeper into the field, the problem occurs: what's consciousness in the first place? All these different theories, and that's why we look for experts who have different views to the topic. And I didn't manage to see your talk in Interlaken, but it sounded very interesting to me. Your personal, maybe even new theory to the topic, and I thought I would like to talk with you, but it's just for internal use, so to say. And the talk would be now the longest 1 hour. Maybe we manage to do it in less time, but I have prepared several questions. So one would just be, for example, as in your discipline, what would you say? How's the concept of consciousness filled right now? What is the state of the art?
Ooh, okay. So in neuroscience, I think it's really there are two main definitions around it, and that also goes back to philosophies. Either it's phenomenologically / experientially through the qualia, and often what is it like to be a bat, cited by Thomas Nagel.
Yeah.
That's one of the definitions that is usually presupposed by the integrated information theory.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's yet another definition which sort of defines, operationalizes consciousness in terms of access and awareness, and that's the global neuronal workspace theory. And we ourselves, in our own theory, temporal spatial theory of consciousness, I have a more sort of ultimately, if you ask me, a more basic definition of consciousness in terms of experience.
Ah, okay.
Old notion of experience, which goes back to philosophy, which is prior to the distinction between first and third person perspective.
Nice. Yeah. Okay.
Because the qualia, the way current philosophy of mind and neuroscience apprehends the qualia is in terms of first-person perspective.
Mm-hmm.
However, when you read the actual paper, Nagel doesn't talk about first-person perspective. So he means it rather as a point of view more basic, but that distinction is not made. Mm-hmm. And basically, if you want to have the perspective of global neuronal workspace, I become aware of something sort of more the second-person perspective. Okay. So for me, it's a basic experience of something prior to the distinction. That is closely in line with psychiatry, because this is where I'm strongly coming from.
Ah, okay. Yeah. So would there be also other theories that you think that are promising? You mentioned now IIT and global workspace theory, most famous maybe right now, and we can come maybe later to the topic that Templeton Foundation is testing these theories. I don't know if you have heard of it.
Those two. Just a student of mine wrote me.
I couldn't believe it neither. So
this is what you politics, no? I don't need to tell you.
Yeah, that's maybe now scientific policy. What's going on there is another interesting topic, because I don't get why some are called to be freaks with their theories and others get millions of dollars for their projects. That's another question. But are there other theories that you think that are promising or out of the philosophical tradition or even new candidates?
I mean, one thing which is not that far from our own temporal spatial approach is by the Fingelkurz brothers up there in Finland, the operational space and time theory. That's an interesting one. That was published in 2010 in Physics and Life Reviews. And these are engineers. These are clever guys. These are from Russia originally.
They are brothers. What's their name? I don't know them.
Alexander and the other one I can't remember. One is Alexander and I can't remember.
And the last name?
Fingelkurz. Fingelkurz. If you contact
Fingelkurz. Wow. Okay, thanks. So operational space and time theory, yeah.
The other theories, Bass, 2013, published a very nice different version of the global neuronal workspace theory, which I think is much more promising than the one by the Dehaene. Then there's, of course, Lammer as always for the recurrent processing theory, which I think has a point. That goes back, obviously, to Edelman and his reentrant loops.
Yeah.
That's basically that connection. And I think that, all these theories highlight one particular aspect.
Yeah.
What they don't really explain for me, why do neuronal states entail consciousness? Because philosophically speaking, you need to establish a necessary connection between your neuronal and mental. Yeah, between the different DNA stuff, Crick and Koch established a necessary connection of the DNA to the genes. And then we knew it was a genetic code. And that is missing in consciousness. And that's where I step in with this idea of common currency. I think did I send you that paper?
Yes, very, very interesting and enlightening for me. Now, if we stay into that analogy, would you say that in the science of consciousness, something that happened in genetics is also missing? That a few years ago, it was just genes and everything was predicted in the genes, and now it's just epigenetics. Everything is just the context. Would you agree? And the same maybe also in philosophy of language. First we had syntax, semantics, and what is pragmatics. We can't deal with it. And now it's maybe the vice versa theory. So bottom up, not anymore top down. And is that maybe interesting in consciousness science too?
Good point. That's something I agree. It's basically the context dependence or the ecological component.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. So, and we have in our theory and also in my latest book, in this MIT book, The Spontaneous Brain, which came out last year. So I strongly emphasize the dependence upon the world or the ecological context.
Yeah.
And we have also one in our TTC, we have one specific mechanism for this, what we call temporal spatial alignment. So we align to the world.
Okay.
If you don't align to the world, you cannot have consciousness. We have now papers testing for that, and we have one almost to be submitted.
Oh, nice.
So if you lose that alignment to the world, the sensory-based alignment, you lose consciousness.
Wow.
Yeah. And that makes sense because consciousness, you experience yourself as part of the wider world. That is never emphasized.
Yeah.
Consciousness is also on a phenomenological level intrinsically ecological. Yeah.
Okay.
That is never emphasized because of the cognitive tradition and the representationalist tradition, which dominates in the Anglo-American world, and the Anglo-American world dominates the world. And that's why they come up with consciousness in the head.
Yeah.
And the answer to the yes is either yes or no. And when the answer is no, then they say, okay, it's not just the head, it's the body.
Yeah.
That's the embodiment. But I would say you have to be much more radical. The alignment to the world is a necessary condition of possible consciousness. Without it, you cannot have consciousness.
Yeah.
If you don't have it, if you lose it, goodbye. But if you have it, then you need some additional stuff to have consciousness.
Okay.
So it's a necessary condition of possible consciousness, a predisposition. That's why I speak of neural predisposition.
Okay. Yeah. Makes totally sense for me, but now maybe it's a nice point to get to our topic, and that would be what relevance does the question if artificial systems could gain consciousness have for you personally? Maybe first question.
Oh, you're tapping into something. So I was asked in July whether I would be co-principal or co-PI on a grant on artificial intelligence. So put that together. And so I have a lot of research on self. So besides consciousness, we do a lot of research on the sense of self. We're very known for that. You can see that on my website. So we do a lot on the self. And that, of course, is also there's some discussion about artificial consciousness, obviously. But I haven't seen any real discussion. There's one guy in Sheffield, Tony Prescott, who claims to have a cognitive self, an artificial self, a robot, which is very cognitive and modularity based. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that such an artificial self lacks the alignment.
Yes.
Exactly this kind of alignment. So that robot is cognitive. The robots are extremely good KI. Or AI extremely good in cognitive tasks and better than humans.
Yes.
However, they're not good in alignment. They don't have a common sense.
Yes.
They don't really know how to tacitly, implicitly navigate in their spatial temporal environment.
Interesting. Yes.
And that's for me the alignment.
That's for you the alignment. Okay. So what would you say is the scientific state of the art? You just mentioned, I don't know him, Tony Prescott, is it correct?
Prescott in Sheffield.
In Sheffield. But there are also other people who claim to have built some kind of conscious robot. There is, for example, a Japanese guy, Takeno, and even Ishiguro, for example, thinks it just happens if you build your own copy of a body. So, but what do you think is going on if we think about connections of biological neurons, so to say, and artificial objects, for example? Do you think that these developments could change something?
Let me put it this way. I don't think that we have to have neurons as a substrate to build artificial consciousness of self.
Okay.
That's just a substrate. So what these neurons have to produce is a certain time-space dynamics. How that time-space dynamics is generated, I don't care, but it needs to be there.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why I say it's a time-space dynamics is a common currency between brain and consciousness, but it could also be a common currency between carbon and consciousness.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So what is essential for consciousness is not the neuron or the brain as such. Mm-hmm. It's the time-space dynamics it produces.
Okay. That's now really interesting, yeah? That would cope with your theory. And how do you rate the importance of AI consciousness to your colleagues? Are there colleagues that you work with together and have the same approach, or are you a single person in your peer group, so to say?
Oh God, the peer group of consciousness that everybody knows better and has its own consciousness because there's so much at stake. I mean, it's a hot topic. People like Dehaene desperately want to get a Nobel Prize. So it's unfortunately all this policy stuff and business stuff is not separated anymore from the science anymore. And Tononi, of course, is like a cult. He has his disciples around him and they trash everything else, and the same, of course, vice versa. So it's a very contentious, very difficult field. I actually go more and more towards mathematicians, physicists, and engineers.
Oh, nice.
There's a reason for that because, to be honest, please don't quote me on that one, but these are much more intelligent than the neuroscientists.
And sometimes like the philosophers too,
Yeah. Yes.
Like the analytical ones.
It's really, I'm really impressed by that, and
Yeah.
I think this is the direction one needs to go if one really wants to advance the science. So
Wow.
we just published our first paper now on the mathematics and consciousness, so that we try to develop a mathematical formal framework for the temporal spatial theory of consciousness.
Interesting.
And we do modeling, so this comes really more and more. 2 weeks ago, and you can see this on my website, I gave a talk at the Perimeter Institute, which is a very well-known institute for theoretical physics here in Canada, in front of physicists, and they understood all this time stuff very
Really? Well. Oh, that's interesting.
So I think that's Lee Smolin is a big name there in the field. So that's really a direction I would go. That I think needs to go. And they understand this time-space dynamic stuff.
That's now very helpful for me to understand your research more, that you are going into that field of your community. That's really, I think, a promising approach. And you named now how your approach is maybe different from other approaches besides your own theory. And if you maybe could now again name in German we say blinde Flecken, yeah, the blind spots. I don't know if it's in English also.
I understand.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Of the other approaches to that topic. You named your own maybe cognitive sciences, but also other special theories like IIT and global workspace theory. Could you maybe see there some big blind spots? What are the problems? Because every theory can't be true. You named also maybe more political problems like institutional ones. But where are the biggest blind spots between all these people and theories?
I think I pointed that out. Really, is which feature in the brain's neuronal activity makes it necessary that consciousness occur.
Okay.
So what you call entail.
Yeah.
Implies.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I try to paraphrase by the concept of common currency.
Common currency.
Because that's of course a criterion. The necessary connection can be a priori, that's philosophy, or a posteriori, that goes with Kripke. That's what is needed, and good science has always had that.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's really the main point, and that means I don't deny the phenomenal or mental features, but you need to link them to the neuronal features, and that hasn't been done. That bridge for me, not there.
Okay.
And actually, I would say I would consider myself not in contradiction to those theories.
Okay.
If my theory is right, my time-space dynamical measures should be able to predict the measures of the IIT and the global neuronal workspace theory.
Wow.
And that, because I would argue I operate on a more basic level.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's science. When you look at scientific framework, Einstein did not say that Newton was wrong.
Yes.
He specified Newton for a certain context.
Yes.
Yeah, and he provided a broader framework.
Yes.
And that's exactly what I would argue, what I would do with the temporal spatial stuff.
Wow,
that's why I say spatial temporal neuroscience is more basic than cognitive neuroscience, the last figure in that paper.
Okay, yeah? Okay, I understand. Oh, that sounds like an interesting year, 2020, for you too, and the work that is done there in your institute. Because, I think we will have a look to what's happening there at the Temple Foundation. And you told me now what your role is maybe also there, and you have people that are writing special papers. But maybe who in or even out of your community would you like to argue with the most?
So a person whom I really respect is Markus Reckle. The default mode person guy. He's a clever guy.
Okay.
Nikos Logothetis, obviously.
Uh-huh.
Tononi you cannot argue with because there's no discussion possible. And the same with Dehaene. And I'm not the only one saying that. That's well known in the community. So that's not... I'm interested in science. I'm not interested in politics. So I want a scientific discussion.
Yeah, we all want that, yeah.
And yeah, those are people whom I respect very much in the neuroscience. Yeah, I think that's, if you ask me spontaneously, for the consciousness people, the Fingerkurz brothers are clever people. Deco does a lot of interesting stuff. Gustavo Deco in Barcelona.
I know.
Somebody you probably might not know is Billuhet. She's a clever person. I know her in person, Billuhet. She wrote this paper with 2009 with Marcus Weckle, Slow Cortical Potentials in Consciousness. She's clever. Actually, I already argued with her. So.
You argued already. Yeah, maybe I have a look to that. Okay. Yeah,
sort of the people I come up with.
I think we get already to a frontier where I have to maybe redo our questions, because I now realize while asking you, it's really a double meaning in the question, who would you like to argue with but can't, because it's a political thing, and whom can you argue with and have already maybe, but nobody listens to it, because sometimes it's what we do, preaching to the converted. But do you think also that there is some work going on which is not visible, so invisible, like in private industry or military?
Yeah, I mean, first the dogmatism. You have to see that, you see this in some of my books and papers, that it really requires a paradigm shift, a different framework, how you conceive the brain.
Yes.
And that is very normal that people are skeptical. That's normal scientifically, and also that they just follow the dogmatic view and take that for granted. That's always the precursor of a paradigm shift. Yeah? And of course now you think, okay, my God, this Northoff has fantasies of narcissistic grandeur.
No.
We are trying to collect the data, and I'm now much less skeptical than 2-3 years ago.
Wow,
so in that sense, you're right. I'm looking forward to what I see in 2020.
Nice.
And I try to get the pieces of the puzzle together. That's what I'm doing, and I'm very excited about it. So that's right. So what? Sorry, now what was your original question? In other parts, yes.
Yeah, something invisible, maybe.
I see. So I hear more and more. I haven't been exposed to much. I'm starting to get into those things in contact. I do think that in companies like Google, Facebook, there's much more interesting stuff going on than in the academia.
Yeah.
And in academia these days is so constrained in what you're allowed to do, because you have to follow the mainstream, you have to follow the hot topics.
Yeah.
What editors of the top journals think it's the hot topic, and only that you can cite. And I was 5 years at Harvard, so I know how it works. At Harvard, when I was there, it was 1999 to 2004. People just looked into the top journals, Nature, Science. What kind of experiments and things do I have to do in order to get published? That's not science. That's marketing.
Yes.
And that's, of course, much, much stronger now, because everything hinges upon grants. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I can give you a very concrete example in my own field, in the fMRI. People do all functional resting state and functional connectivity was the dogma for 5-6 years. Mm-hmm. You could do it back and forth. Everybody did this, and now it's out. Now you can't do it anymore. Now does everybody do the same thing? And you're not allowed to question by yourself or do something else.
Yeah.
So obviously I try to resist that. It's not always easy, but that's sort of the. So I do think the little I know, but I cannot really answer that in a substantial way. I do think that at some of these companies, you have much brighter people, and many of the sensitive people don't want to go into academia because it's such a brutal business.
Yes.
somebody who is really scientifically sensitive, she or he cannot tolerate it. I mean, I start now saying to some people, don't go into academia, which hurts me personally, but
Yes.
it's the reality of the day.
Yes. Same for me. I have so thankful that I can work here at this institute, which is not a typical academia institute, because we're doing technology assessment and system analysis, but I have the feeling that I can work here much more in liberty, so to say, and critically, and even more independent from academia structures. But at the end of the day, we are all working in the same capitalism, and that's another interesting question. But we talked about that you now get into the topic much more, and also into the industrial field maybe. And how do you deal with that? That this topic is such a frontier topic, so to say, with everything that goes with it. So maybe even that you can't talk about what you know.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I'm just really doing my very first baby steps into this thing.
Yeah.
I'm very open to that, because it's sort of a twofold direction thing. So I do think that my approach with this time, space, and the alignment could benefit these people from the AI people, make their devices better, and then on the other hand, my hope is that I can benefit from that.
Nice. Yeah.
First, maybe to develop. To maybe, if my time-space dynamic stuff is right, and they implement and they build something according to these principles that shows the kinds of behavior, great. Then my theory is supported.
Okay.
And the other point, what I hope, and I'm working on that with people, also with engineers particular, that we can develop, let's say, brain-computer interfaces or stimulation chips for psychiatric treatment. That you can deliver better psychiatric treatment on the basis of these temporal-space, time-space dynamical principles. So this is something we are actively working on that, and I'm very open to that. So
sounds like a win-win situation, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It's really on both sides. Yeah.
And how strongly is your broader community involved in these real development projects? Or is that you alone with one assistant, or just interested?
No,
interest me.
I mean, I have collaborations all over the world.
Yeah.
So I do this mainly with collaborators, because I cannot do this by myself. So I have in Japan mathematicians, physicists. In Hong Kong, I work with an engineer together. I have an engineer student here in Ottawa. I work with a mathematician together. So that all only works in collaboration, because I'm way too stupid. Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't work. Yeah. So that's clear.
Lucky guy you are.
Have the right people. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe I get also these informations from your very long homepage. Just had a glimpse on it now. But if you think about how this community you have talked about handles the variety of approaches in theory of consciousness, how do you think they cope with it?
What do you mean? Who is they now?
Yeah, maybe an engineer who you work with, or a mathematician. What do they say about all these theories?
Engineer student here is really confused about what's in neuroscience.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear.
In part, he also says they're simply wrong.
Yeah, thank you. But all of them, or do they have maybe more specified point of view? And you are even arguing with someone because they say, "Oh, I think IIT is really a good theory. It explains something." Or how is the discussion here? Or to be more open, do you just work with your own theory?
No. I mean, we are trying now to work that some of our measures predict some of their measures.
Yes, yeah.
So it's a very active project that I try to basically develop the pro and cons of the other theories, and then also links them to my theories. I don't see that as opposition anymore. As I said, I see this as a broader nesting framework. Yeah?
Yes.
So the IIT has certain merits, and it has other shortcomings, and so does the global neuronal workspace theory. The global neuronal workspace has really very nice experimental paradigms. I must really say that's a great virtue of that, of the hand. That's really well done. Absolutely, no doubt.
Okay, thank you.
And Tononi, I mean, they did some very interesting stuff with modeling in earlier papers. So it's the very early papers of Tononi with Edelman are really good. 98, 99. They're really, really good for the time. And I think those are much more interesting than the more recent.
I understand. So where it gets more dogmatic, huh? Yeah.
Exactly, that's the point.
Okay.
I didn't want to spell it out as such, but that's exactly
I could say it. So if we now maybe shift to the future, what kind of development in the field of artificial consciousness do you think would be a utopian way with a favorable course, and which would maybe a dystopian way? What do you say to future scenarios, bad and good, out of your point of view?
It's an interesting. I mean, the goods. What I really hope that it can provide novel ways and better and more causal ways of treatment for psychiatric disorders, which is really a blind spot, as you said before. It's a lot of trial and error, and I really think that's the way to go there. Yeah?
Yeah.
So, and I'm not sure how much that is really part of the debate in this whole AI. Also in the consciousness, the debate, the psychiatry is more or less neglected. It sort of runs parallel. But I would say you can learn a lot from psychiatry for consciousness and for AI.
Thank you. That's what many people say, but it seems to be not institutional thinking, huh?
Yeah, it's not an institutional thinking. It's more sort of. So I think really, because the lines are different.
Yeah.
What else there is? Then of course, in the real world for climate change, simulation modeling, medicine, neurosurgery, finances, prediction, health system. So this is the usual stuff. Then, of course, let's say come to the other kind of horror scenario.
Yes,
Thomas
horror
Metzinger
scenario.
sketch. Yeah. See, I'm too much of a scientist to participate in these big speculations. I'm careful. And the older I get, the more careful I become.
I understand you totally. But you don't have to tell a whole story, but maybe just to give your point of view, what could be really dangerous. Maybe where we should think twice or three times about it, yeah?
See, I recently read this book of what is this called from MIT guy, Max T, blah, 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 Max T, I can't remember his last name, 2000. And he speaks of life 3.0. And he says life 2.0 is humans and life 3.0 is artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And then he sketches various scenarios. And let's face it. So far, I try to put a different spin on it.
Yes.
So humans consider themselves the center and the highest of evolution.
Yes.
And that's the way they behave on this planet.
Yeah.
So now let's say there will be creatures which are more intelligent than us.
Yes.
So then we will be just one creature among others. And the same way now we change the environmental spaces for other creatures.
Yeah.
Our environmental spaces may then also be changed by the other species.
Yes.
So let's put it this way. I don't think that we die out. Whether they will do the same stupidities as we, maybe, maybe not. But I think what is important, and that brings me back to a crucial issue in philosophy, is we have a very anthropocentric view.
Yes.
So I think we really need, also in neuroscience and in philosophy, what I like to describe, and it's not me, it goes back to Kant, obviously, and Copernican revolution.
Yes.
I discuss this in my MIT book in length. A paper will come out soon on that. And I think the discussion of AI would benefit from a more post-Copernican view.
Okay. So
that's
even
for
in
instance,
ethics,
what I said with evolution. Yeah, that then we would be just one species among others, but no longer the godlike species we're pretending to be now. That would be for me a post-Copernican view where I look beyond myself, beyond ourselves as humans.
very, very interesting. To be honest, do you think that this is independent of the question if these AI systems would be conscious or not?
Yes.
Yes, independent.
I don't think, yeah, good question. I don't think, again, this question for conscious now is for us the topic and the big mystery. When you look into the history of science, certain questions which seem to be unresolvable suddenly shifted into the background. We're not as relevant anymore once you consider the larger framework in which it is. Yeah?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I would say. Yeah? So I think this, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a lot of discussion of a life principle, elan vital.
Yeah, elan vital. I thought a lot about that, or about eta, something like that. Yeah, too.
Exactly. And now we smile. Said, how stupid could we be at the time? Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Because we cut the broader context. It was not relevant anymore. It's neither right or wrong. It's not relevant. Philosophically, it's nonsensical.
I understand you. Wow.
Like the concept of mind is nonsensical. You neither pro nor contra. It's not needed. Come on. There are better explanations.
Now I would like to have this video of you, but I just have the audio file, to be honest. But that would be a nice 10-second of you. So, and how do your colleagues rate what you say here? What do you think?
So, you'll be surprised. When I go to the eastern part of the world, I'm often in China, and Japan, and Taiwan.
Yeah.
They very well understand the time-space stuff, the Copernican stuff, and the ecological, the world stuff. Because that's their tradition.
Yeah.
When you go to China and you have been there, it's the original principle, you have to be in harmony with nature.
Yes. Feng Shui.
You're just not the center.
I totally understand now. Even in the food, you cannot eat German food, just meat and potato. That's no food. You need something else. You need fish and vegetables. And I understand. Yeah.
So that's a very tradition. And to be honest, I do think that the brain works in the Eastern mode, not in the Western mode. The Anglo-American tradition detaches from the context. It considers representation. The world is at best secondary, but not primary, basic. Time-space dynamic, time-space is only as we perceive it in terms of discrete points in time and space. And so they have a very hard time understanding this approach. And trust me, I got a lot of front wind for that.
Wow.
Yeah. So, which was also a good lesson, because now I need to better explicate myself and link it to this approach.
Yes.
Fine. But ultimately, I think, and that's where I'm working on things.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's opening, and that's what I can see here in the Anglo-American world. It's very difficult for them to understand. because they have different preconceptions.
I understand. So we have to learn more dialectics, maybe. I think that's what Hegel wanted to tell us too, huh? That
I just wanted to say Hegel, yeah. Hegel war
yeah.
Hegel, yeah.
Yeah, maybe you.
Yeah.
I want to do a workshop about that, because I have a feeling even here in Stuttgart, where I'm living, it's the birthplace of Hegel. Nobody reads Hegel, and can we even understand Hegel? But in Leipzig, Pirmin Stekeler-Weithofer is a very interesting philosopher who read it like out of a philosophy of language perspective. Although Hegel never ever uses the word language, I think, but that's very interesting from a psychoanalytic point of view. So maybe he talks all the time about nothing else but language. It's very interesting. So maybe do you happen to be in Germany in some day in 2020? Because when we are working on a workshop, or even maybe we are doing something like a scientific battle where people have to argue in public, would you be interested in something like that?
Battle I find interesting. I'm always for a good discussion.
Wow.
With interesting people.
So I have already a few names from you, and maybe we can talk about that then also per email. But thank you very much for that. We are also in contact with Ishiguro from Japan. Everybody wants to argue with him, for example. Seems to be an easy candidate, but maybe we are looking for a harder candidate for you.
I would be very open to that. You give me early enough time, then I can try to put this in.
Perfect.
And that I would find interesting. The other thing which would be then also interesting, have some clever students around it from different disciplines.
That's a good point.
Different disciplines, because many of the engineers, some of the physicists, mathematicians are really interested in that. And I'm very open then also for collaboration or collaborative projects or something like that. Yeah,
oh, that sounds perfect.
Or from the AI community in Germany or something. So I'm very interested in that kind of direction, if I can say that. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe then we just stay in contact, and I would write you an email with some context that we have. I get through what you have said through the interview, and maybe send you some names that didn't occur, and maybe I have to ask for some names if I didn't get them right. So if that would be okay, we just write each other.
Yeah, just give some names, also brief what they do, because some of the names probably
just name is not enough. So maybe
then
just
we can see go from there.
Yeah, Takeno, for example, from Japan, who seems very, very thorough that he has produced something totally different, and he's dealing with mirror neurons, because he says that's important, need to be mirror neurons, and now he has a robot that can recognize itself in the mirror, and I think that's now enough for him to say it's a conscious robot, but I don't believe it, to be honest, and so there are a lot of things going on, and we have now also opened our homepage, and maybe I write something on Twitter too, just that we have done this interview, and I will publish anything. I just will send you the audio file. Now we have done almost 45 minutes interview. I think that's enough. I would have some questions, but I think you answered already what's standing here. So if you don't have any more questions, I would just say thank you a lot for this interesting talk.
Yeah. So one thing, maybe you can send me those informations about the people, and maybe a link to your website, so that I see a little bit what exactly you're doing.
Yes.
It would be interesting to see. And I'm very open to something like that, so that I would find interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I will be in touch with you, and very soon that we can talk about this next year project. This year, we have to do that, I think. So have a nice work day, and enjoy your view. I enjoyed it now all the time. Really amazing, yeah? And I will have a beer now.
Pardon?
I will have a beer now and eat something.
Okay, yeah, that's real German. You can't hide it. Yeah.
I can't hide it. I'm sorry. Ciao.
Good night.
Thank you so much. Ciao.
Bye.